First of all, I'd like to say thank you and for coming and welcome to tonight's meeting. We'll be talking about the bicycle and pedestrian trail connectivity feasibility study for the city of Ellsworth, and this is our first public meeting. My name is Tony Grande. I'm the project manager for this project. With me tonight from VHB is Ethan Flynn, senior project engineer who will be directing the design for the project. Nate Howard from Maine DOT is working with this project for the Maine Department of Transportation from the planning group, and Jenna Richards for the city of Ellsworth as well. And you'll be hearing from them later on this evening as the meeting goes on. So this is what I would like to go over tonight. We'll talk about some meeting logistics, how the meeting is going to be run. There's a technical advisory committee for this project, and we'll go through that list of members. I'll do a project overview, talk about the scope of work and the schedule. And then Ethan will discuss the study area, talk about the existing conditions, review some conceptual base plans. And then the majority, hopefully, of time that will be spent in a single slot will be the public input in question and answer time. We've allotted a lot of time for that, and hopefully we can get some good participation this evening. So meeting logistics, everybody has been muted from throughout the meeting, and the way that we're going to run the meeting is to run through the presentation first. That's why we've allowed such a large amount of time for questions and answers at the end. And you should be able to raise your hand from your settings on the toolbar within Zoom. You raise your hand and then we will be able to let you ask a question live. We'll unmute you and you'll be able to ask your question live, and then we will respond to that question if possible. And also there's a Q&A, so if you don't feel like speaking or talking about your question, you can type in a question, and we will try to read that question and then respond to it live as well. And if there are any questions that we can't answer, then we'll follow up with those at a later time. If you're just phoning in and you would like to ask a question, if you press *9, which will raise your hand, that will indicate to us that you have your hand raised, and then we will be able to unmute you and allow you to ask your question. And so as far as the Q&A goes, if you ask a question, you will probably wait until the very end to answer it, just so that you know that. But if you have a question as we're going through the presentation, I suggest you write it down so that you remember it. Or you could type in the question at that time when you hear it, and then we will answer it as we get to it after the presentation is completed. So, and then there's also the opportunity after the presentation to email comments to Kerry Taylor and visit the city website. We will be recording this meeting and probably be available on the city's website as well. So, Technical Advisory Committee. We have several members from the city, including the city manager, Jana, Lisa, Jason. We have some counselors involved as well. 3 members from Maine DOT, Christine Keeney from the East Coast Greenway, and there may be others as well that are involved from the East Coast Greenway as we move forward. We have some area residents as well that are on the committee, and Maine Community Foundation members. And we've added, since the project has started, the new city planner, Teresa. Welcome, Teresa. So I'm going to just run through the project understanding and scope of work. This is a map of the study area, which begins at the intersection of the existing trail at Birch Avenue, which is located here. Hopefully you can see my red pointer there sliding across the A. And it starts at A, the end of the Ellsworth Trail, over to B, and it runs along the rail line / Spring Street, and then along the rail line here, and then it also includes Beals Avenue as an option as well. So the distance here between A and B is approximately 3/4 of a mile. So the other colors that you see on the map here, the Sunrise Trail is also colored as part of the East Coast Greenway. And then the East Coast Greenway goes to facilities are an off-road option the rest of the way, Main Street and Beals Avenue. But this is really considered, the Sunrise Trail is really considered the East Coast Greenway Trail. And that's where it ends, right there. As I mentioned, the study area itself is shown in yellow, and this area of the rail is also used by the Down East Scenic Railroad. There's some stars that you see on here where we've indicated there have been some bicycle crashes in the past, and this area here has also been located, has also been a high crash segment identified by Maine DOT. So that's the general study area. So project overview. This project is a planning partnership initiative between the City of Ellsworth and Maine DOT. And I'd like to allow Jana to discuss that a little bit.
Sure, thanks, Tony. So I'm Jana Richards. I'm the Development Services Director for the City of Ellsworth. I'm just looking through the attendees list, and I can see from those that are on here that for a lot of you, this isn't a new concept to try to connect our two trails that have their terminus in the urban core of Ellsworth. It's a long time coming. It's a discussion that's been had. There's been previous, analysis of trying to connect these trails together. And so when it came time, we saw that the Planning Partnership Initiative was an option for us, for the city. We figured we would pursue this further for several reasons. One reason is we feel that it would be an easier transition into actually constructing this trail connector in the near future. The other part is that in the past several years, there's been significant growth in both residential and commercial development in the city's urban core. And so that just sort of pressed harder the need for a seamless connector trail to help those living within the urban core access services and amenities that are also located in the urban core with safety in mind and without having to use a vehicle. We all know what traffic is like on High Street and on our other major corridors. And so reducing that traffic by promoting walking and biking is high priority. I would say that part of the city's vision in 2015 also pointed out that a lot of our city residents are looking for more connectivity between trails, looking for more ability to
I think we may have got a hiccup in audio for a moment.
Yes.
We just give that a second to catch up. I'll send a message to Jana to see if she can see that. Pardon me for one moment. Tony, I sent her a note, and while we wait, I'm wondering if maybe you can perhaps jump to the rest of the slide, and if we get Jana back, she can cover what she was, the thought she was trying to finish.
Oh, there she is.
Oh,
I'm sorry, my internet. There's another economic development issue that needs to be in this area. But I will just keep going. I'm not sure where you left off on me, but I was just saying that one of the final reasons why this has become an even higher priority is because we look at trails in the city of Ellsworth as a way to promote visitors and tourism within not only the city of Ellsworth, but also within the region as a whole. I do see we've got the East Coast Greenway representative on this call, and also those from the greater Acadia region tourism. And I know that the Sunrise Trail stretches throughout our region as a whole. So economically benefit the city, economically benefit the region, definitely a benefit to our residents who are living, working, and consuming within the urban core, as well as any visitors that come to visit us here in the city. So hopefully you got everything I was trying to convey forward, and I will give it back over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jana. So as we discussed earlier, the purpose of the study is to evaluate and analyze alternatives that will connect the Ellsworth Trail to the Sunrise Trail. And you can see that those will be looking at some of the potential improvements that we'll be looking at are new or rehabilitated sidewalks, roadway and pavement markings, could be crosswalks, different types of lane markings, new signage, possibly destination and wayfinding signs, could also require some parking restrictions depending on what we come up with. And then some advanced bicycle and pedestrian warning signs. That could also involve some enhanced pedestrian and bicyclist street crossings or intersection treatments as well. Some drainage adjustments I'm sure will be required, and roadway and trail improvements throughout. So the general scope of work, we've already held our project kickoff meeting with the city and with Maine DOT. We have reviewed some of the available data, which is still ongoing. Available data for projects like this seem to last throughout the entire project. So we often find out that developments come as the project is moving forward. And if you know of any of those, we'd love to hear about them. We'll be evaluating the potential bike and ped path locations. We've just started that process, but one of the reasons we're here tonight is we don't want to go too far before we hear your thoughts or the community's input on what we should be looking at as well. Then we'll develop some preliminary recommendations based on that. We'll get some additional public and agency feedback, and then develop a report from there. So things that we've looked at for available data: the local comprehensive plan, traffic counts and crash summaries from Maine DOT within the study area, land use and economic development information, any other relevant data, reports, or studies that are been around, communication with stakeholder groups such as the East Coast Greenway, the Down East Scenic Railroad, other stakeholders, property owners that might need access, that where this trail goes could create issues. We need to be aware of those. And then ongoing discussions with the city and with Maine DOT as well. So with our site visit, we'll do a more detailed site visit. We did one prior to this for the proposal stage, but we'll do a detailed one now as we move forward with the project to identify existing signage, street lighting, what's out there today for pedestrian crossings. Are there sight distance issues? What type of condition is the pavement in? Existing drainage structures and issues, utility locations, and are there any potential conflicts with that? And of course, the adjacent railroad and any constraints or opportunities that may provide as well. So when we evaluate these path locations, we'll be also trying to identify any deficiencies that exist today for bicycles and pedestrians. And we'd be more than happy to hear any of those that people know of within the study area as well. We'll look at the existing right-of-way ownership. We do have the railroad ownership plans in hand as well. We'll look at baseline environmental data, which is part of any study of this nature. We'll look at alternative routes. One will be also around the back of the main community foundation building, which Ethan will be talking a little bit more about as we move forward. And with that, we'll develop various levels of improvements. Some could be short-term, long-term, and associated costs with those. Other things we'll be considering will be construction phasing as well. And as Jana mentioned, there's a lot of benefits that will be provided by this new connection. And then we will review those findings with the team members and then discuss potential recommendations and any additional alternatives that might come up from those discussions. And then from there, we'll develop the preliminary recommendations. We'll identify the recommended improvements, which may be different for each segment as we move along, but that's what we'll be identifying. We will, within those recommendations, look at the impacts, any permitting hurdles that we can expect or anticipate, and then future costs as well. And those costs will include planning, design, and construction phases as well for the future. As I mentioned, we'll be looking at short-term or long-term improvements as well. Short-term being something that could happen within less than a year. This project will more than likely take several years before it comes to fruition, but there may be interim steps that could be done to improve safety for bicycles and pedestrians along the way. And then we'll develop some conceptual plans of those recommended improvements as well. The public agency and feedback, we have planned for 2 public meetings, tonight being the first of those, where we're going to be reviewing the scope and the project limits, and really here to get your feedback and input to help identify and understand local issues and opportunities. And then at the second meeting, which will be towards the end of the study, we'll come back and present draft recommendations and a draft report. And then the final report will include comments on that draft. It'll include a narrative of the study process itself, all the alternatives that were considered, the criteria that was used to evaluate those alternatives, conceptual designs of the preferred alternative, and then also some of those potential spot improvements will be identified as well. And the project costs will be broken down depending on the alternative, both short and long term. So as far as project schedule goes, we began the project in June. We've been, as I mentioned, reviewing available data and starting to evaluate path locations. You can see in August here, we're having this public meeting now tonight, and we're going to continue to develop locations for the path, hopefully take the input that we received tonight and be able to keep moving forward. And then meet with the Technical Advisory Committee again in September, move forward in starting to develop preliminary recommendations, and then through September and October, and prepare a draft report for October, review that report with the Technical Advisory Committee again towards the end of October, and then likely come back with public meeting number 2 sometime in November, and then taking all those comments and incorporating them into the finalized final report, which we hope to complete by the end of November, definitely by the end of this year. So with this study area and existing conditions, I think I will turn the presentation over to Ethan so that he can start describing in more detail than I have.
Thanks, Tony. As Tony said, I'm the project engineer for this project. And just to once again go over the project limits in a little more detail. You'll see the project limits shown in yellow, and there's a few dots there on the screen. Some are letters, some are numbers. The letters indicate that it's a single point location. The numbers are more of a specific location. As Tony stated, the goal of this is to connect from the left side of your screen to from the Ellsworth Trail to the right side of your screen to the Sunrise Trail. Also shown in blue is the East Coast Greenway. And these are designated travel paths for the East Coast Greenway. You can see Beals Ave is blue and Main Street is blue as well. If we go ahead to the next slide, you'll see an example of the aerial base map that we're using. You'll notice that it's from 2014. And if you go ahead to the next slide, Tony, we can zoom in, and this is the intersection. Oh, there we go. The intersection of Main Street, High Street, and Oak Street gives you a better idea of the quality of the resolution. Again, it is from 2014, so some things may be out of date, but we chose this year because it had the best clarity. We will confirm things with a site visit. We've already been on site once, but as we develop the options, if we need to confirm anything that's changed since 2014, we'll do that in the field.
The other thing to keep in mind here is that the city is getting new aerial photography, but unfortunately it will not be available until we're finishing the study. So I guess we will have that at least as a check when we're done.
Exactly. Thanks for pointing that out, Tony. And then as far as the elevations go, we're using LiDAR, GIS LiDAR data. The data points there are a few meters apart, not the best elevations. We won't see things like curb and stuff that show up on there, but again, we're going to confirm everything with site visits. Diving in a little more detail, starting on the left side of your screen, you'll see location A. This is the end of the Ellsworth Trail, where we'll need to cross Birch Ave. Oh, thanks, Tony. Yeah, and then section 1 is Spring Street from Birch Ave to Park Street. Section 2 is Spring Street starting from Park Street through Lincoln Street to Church Street. Section 3 is Spring Street from Church Street to Main Street. Section 4 is Main Street. And then you'll see that, there's some numbers on Beals Ave as well as along the Down East Scenic Railroad corridor. We're going to look at a couple different options. We're going to look at potentially routing folks along Beals Ave or around the main community foundation and down the scenic rail corridor. So section 5 is along Beals Ave. Section 6 deals with how do we get around the main community foundation, and section 7 is the rest of that Down East Scenic Rail. And then we get to location B, which is how we either connect from Beals Ave to the Sunrise Trail or from the railroad corridor to the Sunrise Trail. And each one of those presents different challenges. And then lastly, we have location C, which is on the far right of the screen, which is the intersection of Merrill Street and High Street. This is an existing signalized intersection, and there are PED buttons out there to give you the illusion that you can cross, but they're non-functional right now. So we'll be looking at upgrading that signal, providing pedestrian signals, new push buttons, improved crossings, improved pedestrian ramps as well. And Tony, if you want to go to the next slide. So diving into these a little deeper as far as what are the existing conditions at each location. Location A, which is the end of the Ellsworth Trail, going into Spring Street. Depending on the path chosen, we may need to cross both Birch Ave and the Down East Scenic Railroad. So that'll present some challenges. So wayfinding and striping will be very important there. And then in section 1, this is, again, Spring Street from Birch to Park. Narrow roadway, about 17 feet. There's no existing sidewalks. The pavement's in poor condition. There are several homes and businesses that have accesses that will need to be maintained. And Spring Street Spring Street in this section, as well as the whole project, by and large, is inside the railroad right of way. So that also presents some challenges. If we move ahead to section 2, Tony. So section 2 is Spring Street from Park Street through Lincoln and ending at Church Street. This section is gravel. It's narrow, 12 feet wide. There are some remnants of old pavement, so it may have been paved at one point, but for all intents and purposes today, it's gravel. The roadside drainage is in poor condition. There's limited entrances to homes and businesses in this section, so that kind of opens up some different options that, you know, potentially we could close this to vehicular traffic and just make it the path in this section. And another thing to note is that the railroad in this section is significantly higher than Spring Street. In section 1, it's, you know, the rail is 3 to 5 feet higher. In this section, it's more like 8 to 12 feet higher. Section 3 is Spring Street from Church to Main Street. Again, this is a narrow section, but this section is paved. It has some commercial entrances. There is an existing rail crossing kind of right under that number 3 shown on the screen, where there's a commercial entrance onto Spring Street, which crosses the rail. There's no sidewalks on this section of road. And then the other thing to point out, where that yellow star is, excuse me, the red star, as you're coming down Church Street, there's the existing railroad overpass shown in the upper left. And as a vehicle is traveling downstream, they're coming at you in the picture. They're going to have trouble seeing potential walkers or cyclists crossing the path if it does end up on Spring Street. So that's another thing that we'll consider and provide advanced signing, warning signs, both to the peds, bicyclists, and motorists to make that crossing as safe as possible. You can go to the next slide, Tony. So section 4 is Main Street. Again, this is a designated travel path for the East Coast Greenway. Depending on what the option, the route chosen from here to the end, whether we go on Beals Ave or how we get around the main community foundation, we'll have to look at various crossing locations on Main Street. You know, we may cross right at the railroad at the intersection of Spring Street. We may bring people up Main Street, cross them onto Beals Ave. So depending on the option from Main Street to the end of Beals and the beginning of Sunrise, we'll look at a host of options, and that may also include adding sidewalk to the right side of the screen here, where sidewalk only exists on the left side. That will also give us an opportunity to address some of the drainage issues between Beals and the main community foundation parking lot that exists today. Section 5 is Beals Ave. Again, this is designated a travel path for the East Coast Greenway. It's narrow, 20 feet, no sidewalk. The pavement's in poor condition. The city does have an ongoing design project there with a separate consultant to reconstruct Beals Ave, and they're looking at some options of widening shoulders, adding sidewalk, and also upgrading some underground utilities there. So we'll coordinate with them and bring in a lot of their data for our Beals Avenue alternatives. If you want to go to the next slide, Tony. And then location 6 is the main community foundation. We'll look at a couple options here. Potentially putting a new shared use path that would go behind the main community foundation, behind the wall that's adjacent to their parking lot, and then come down to the railroad corridor where the the old loading platform is. And then section 7 is the remaining rail corridor, and we'll look at putting the path in that rail corridor as well. Another thing to note is that platform shown in picture 7, the Downey Scenic Rail has moved their loading and unloading to Washington Junction, but have expressed a desire to keep that, if at all possible, if they do need to unload people there, and in the future, if there was some sort of city event downtown where they were going to transport people or something like that. If you want to go to the next slide, Tony. And then we'll have location B, which is the end of the Sunrise Trail. So depending on the option, whether we use Beals Ave or the rail corridor, we'll have to look at various crossing options there. Today, the Sunrise Trail terminates into the sidewalk on High Street. So we'll extend that towards the end of Beals Ave and connect it into this corridor. And then location C, again, is the signalized intersection of Merrill Street, where we'll look at improving signals, improving the pedestrian push buttons and pedestrian ramps. If you want to go to the next slide, Tony. So we'll take a look at the conceptual base plans here. And again, this is section 1. And we're going to look at a few different options. And when I say we're looking at options in developing this report, we're going to look at various options. Some of them that I may talk about may not seem that feasible to you, but we're still going to evaluate and develop some preliminary costs and what are the challenges in terms of right-of-way or utilities, et cetera, just so that gets captured in the report, because this report will then be used as a foundation to seek future funding. So anyone who wants to look at that from a permitting agency can make sure that we did our due diligence in evaluating all the alternatives. So in this section, you know, when Tony talked about the short term and long term, the short term and the low cost option could just be adding siding and striping, wayfinding, signs. It could involve a pavement preservation project on Spring Street to fix the pavement. It would also facilitate better striping. When I'm talking about striping, I'm talking about things that are sharrows, which are the stencil on the roadway, which is the bike symbol with the chevrons above it that indicate that motorists should expect cyclists to be riding in the road. The next step up from there would be, you know, looking at maybe putting a sidewalk on adjacent to Spring Street. That may require retaining walls adjacent to the rail. Given the grade separation there, it may require adding closed drainage. And then we'll also look at continuing the Ellsworth Trail along the rail on the high side from this screen as another option. And as we dive deeper into this and hear feedback from you folks, we may add multiple more options for each one of these sections. For the next section, if you want to advance, Tony. Again, this is the gravel section of Spring Street from Park to Church. So again, one option would be to close it off to vehicular traffic. There is one entrance for that building on the corner of Lincoln and Spring Street, where their driveway kind of comes off Lincoln and continues and goes through and does connect onto Spring Street. So that'll have to we'll have to work together with that property owner there if we do end up closing it off, so we have a solution that works for everyone. You know, the next step up there would be to add pavement, add striping. You know, one step up there again would be sidewalk, and then we'll look at keeping the trail adjacent to the rail here, but there are some more challenges here that the rail is more raised. You have the rail bridge going over Lincoln Street, so getting folks across that bridge is obviously gonna create some challenges there as well. If you want to go to the next slide, Tony. And here we have Spring Street from Church to Main. Again, this is a paved section. So again, the low cost, short-term fixes could be siding and striping, paving it. But again, we'll look at adding sidewalk, and again we'll look at putting the trail adjacent to the rail here as well. And again, as I mentioned on the existing condition slides, what we do on Main Street will vary based on where we go from Main Street to the Sunrise Trail. So we could cross Main Street right at the intersection of Spring. We could bring folks up the left side of Main Street and cross them halfway up and go behind the community foundation, or we could bring them all the way up to Beals Ave and cross them up there. And we could cross them still at Spring Street and bring them up the right side. So we'll look at various options there. Other things that we'll look at is narrowing up the roads to widen the shoulders, maybe adding sidewalk on the right-hand side of the screen. Tony, if you want to go to the next slide. So here you'll see the majority of Main Street to the end of Beals Ave. As far as going around the main community foundation, we'll look at keeping that inside the rail right away. It's very tight. That there's going to be a lot of challenges there. Possibly some right-of-way impacts, possibly some walls, and then we'll have to, from looking at it, we'll probably bring folks on the bottom side of the rail and then have to cross the rail once we get past the main community foundation. Another alternative is to go above the main community foundation from this perspective and then bring them down to where that existing passenger platform is. In this area, the grade coming down to the platform is pretty steep, so that may require additional walls. We'll have the existing walls on the low side, but we may need additional walls on the high side of the trail to hold back embankments. Then once we get inside the railroad corridor, the right-of-way opens up pretty good. So we don't see any issues if putting the trail in there other than coordinating that with the Downey Scenic Rail and coordinating the right-of-way there. There is some existing retaining walls there on the high side of the right-of-way for the rail. A lot of them are pretty dilapidated, so we may look at fixing those, or it may be that we could actually remove them and just replace it with sloping, depending on where the trail is located relative to the rail. And then on Beals Ave, as I said, the city already has a different firm looking at reconstructing Beals Ave. The original thought there was just reconstructing it with its existing width, but then they considered adding shoulders and also sidewalk, and then realized that some of the underground utilities were not in the best shape. So we'll piggyback off what they've already started and incorporate some of those costs, and also incorporate those options, so whether we reconstruct it with the existing width or add sidewalk and or shoulders. If you want to go to the next slide, Tony. And then here you'll see the end of Beals Ave. Another topic of discussion that came up with that other reconstruction project, if you don't mind going, yeah, there you go, was looking at terminating Beals Ave prior to High Street. So that's something that we'll consider and look at the impacts of that. I mean, there'll be right-of-way impacts of how we terminate, whether it'll be a cul-de-sac or something else, so that the city can maintain it in the winter. We'll have to consider how that may affect emergency vehicles getting to the hospital. And then whether or not we close it or not, that'll affect how we potentially route the path up Beals Avenue. And then as we cross where Beals Avenue is today, If the path is in the railroad corridor, it's going to be on the high side of the rail. So we'll probably cross Beals Avenue on the high side of the rail and then cross the railroad kind of right above the H in High Street and then connect to the existing Sunrise Trail. The thinking right now is to leave the connection to High Street just in case anyone coming down the Sunrise Trail or this new trail wants to continue on High Street, that connection point is still there. And if you went on the next slide, Tony. And then here's this last location, which is the signalized intersection of Merrill Lane. If you look on the bottom of the screen, those yellow stars on either end are existing crosswalk locations. There's just under a mile between the two. So that's why we're looking at this intersection of High Street and Merrill. It's a good midpoint. So, because it's a real challenge for folks to cross High Street, given that it's at least 4 lanes, and in some spots it's 5 lanes with a left turn lane at the intersection. So we will improve that signalized intersection, and then just to the upper left of that red star is where the LL Bean outlet is, and there is trail connectivity behind there to the Sunrise Trail. So this all ties back into the trail connectivity. And I believe that is my last slide, Tony. So with that, I'll let Tony talk about the public input and discussion.
Thank you, Ethan. So the focus of tonight's meeting, as I had mentioned earlier, is really to hear from the public, from the community, to help us identify and understand some of the local issues and opportunities. And hopefully we will get some good discussion going as we move forward tonight. Some things to consider. The study's purpose is to evaluate and analyze connectivity alternatives between the two trails, so to make that connection. So what else can you think of to add to the discussion that will help to make this project a success? Any other ideas or options that should be considered that you haven't heard anything tonight about yet tonight? Anything specific to a location that we would like to be, that you want us to be aware of? Potential future developments also should be considered, or anything else that you think is relevant to the study itself. What are your hopes or for an outcome from this study? And then just any questions or comments that you have in general that you'd like us to respond to. So right now, I would say that this would be a good time for people to raise their hand or add a question in the Q&A. And I see that there are 2 questions in here right now. So I will get started by going with the first of 2 questions. Is there a plan or a way to connect south to north for all the residents of Spruce, Pine, Elm, Dean, etc., streets to connect to this trail? Crossing High Street is a very dangerous task and one that would deter most people from biking or walking this proposed path. That is a very good question. And that's something that we can look into.
Tony?
So basically you're talking from these neighborhoods right here. Yes, go ahead, Jana.
I was just going to say, perhaps since we know that there is already a signalized crossing at Main Street over High Street, and then we're looking at a signalized crossing at Merrill Lane. Mm-hmm. Perhaps part of what we could look at for this feasibility study is not only how would you connect like Washington and Foster Streets, which are a little bit further down, but how would you get it some of these other side streets connected through those crossings? Because I think that that's going to be the way to do the north-south connection is through the actual signalized crossings throughout the study area.
I would agree with that. And again, I would say that it's we're likely not going to be able to answer these questions completely tonight, but this is what we want to hear so that we know what we have the opportunity to look forward to and incorporate into the study. So we have another question. Are any representatives from the Down East Sunrise Trail Coalition on the call, or from Frenchman Bay Conservancy and Maine Coast Heritage Trust? The coalition has been talking this over for many years with the state, city, county, city, and regional representatives that have a wealth of information to share. These are critical partners whose commitment and capacity to make this project succeed are not to be overlooked. Several people on the call are already engaged in this conversation, and Frenchman Bay Conservancy and Maine Coast Heritage Trust also seek to connect their urban lands with downtown Ellsworth. I'm glad to see this important work happening at last. Thank you. Please keep me in the loop so I can help engage key partners. That was Crystal Hitchings. Thank you, Crystal. So I'm not sure if there are any, do you know, Jana, if any of those representatives are on this call or in the meeting? And if not, we can make sure that we reach out.
I don't specifically see anyone from Sunrise Trail Coalition. I did see earlier that Jim Fisher was on here. I think he may have signed off. Jim worked for Hancock County Planning Commission for a while. He was very engaged with the Sunrise Trail Coalition during the time when the Sunrise Trail was trying to have the last mile into Ellsworth. I would say that during the data collection phase of this study that these partners should be reached out to just to see what sort of materials they may have from the past that might be helpful, and future and present studies that or data that they have that might be helpful that could be incorporated into this study as well. So Crystal, if you, I know that the Kecklers were once presidents of the Sunrise Trail Coalition. I'm not sure if they are anymore. If you want to email us separately or put in the chat or the Q&A contact information, or if we should just contact you directly to get their info to try to get some of that data to be incorporated into the study as existing conditions, that would be great.
Thank you, Jana. And then Crystal also added work with land trusts and Bird's Acre to connect across the city. And I just want to, I mean, I know that a lot of times there's other studies that have gone on or other work efforts that have gone on which kind of touch a larger area than what we have to look at here. But I also realize that some of them would go right through here, and that's the area that we would be focused on, right through our study area. Anything that we could do to help facilitate plans that have been ongoing would be great. Are the people that live on Beals Ave in favor of closing the High Street entrance and making it part of the trail? That is a great question. And we do have two okay. we do have two members at least that live on Beals Ave that are on the committee. So hopefully we will be able to get some feedback from Beals Ave residents as part of this study. And I'm not sure at this point, you know, we would like to know that information, and I think the city would like to know that information because they were looking at that already before this study even came to be as a possibility. When hearing talk about High Street, I think at present, most of High Street does not seem to be safe for bicyclists. Do you intend to make clear bicycle lanes? So this study is not really looking at doing much to High Street itself. The only thing we're looking at on High Street is the intersection with Merrill, and also any interaction that it might have by closing Beals Avenue off. But we're not necessarily going to be looking at adding or creating bicycle lanes or anything else really along High Street. That's not part of this study, is to evaluate High Street. I don't know if the city or DOT has any plans to look at anything like that. So, Jen, I don't know if you are able to add anything to that, or?
Well, obviously the safety of High Street is always one of our concerns, but right now we're looking at utilizing the trail systems that we have in town, similar to what Crystal was talking about, trying to connect all of these trail systems throughout the city. So looking at these as pieces of the puzzle, and then in the end being able to connect them all together. The hope is that if we do that, you might not have to ride your bicycle on High Street. You could take alternate routes throughout the city to get wherever you're going. Of course, we want to make sure that the crossings of High Street to be able to get to those alternative routes are safe for bicyclists and pedestrians. So that's sort of the focus right now, is to have this integrated trail system where hopefully you wouldn't have to ride on some of the major corridors.
Right. They have those in some of the other cities like Portland. They're called bicycle byways, or network that they have. It's basically exactly as you described, using the city streets to promote bicycle use, and then along the larger streets, making the safe crossing for people to cross there, which is kind of what we'd be talking about here. As you mentioned, anything across High Street would need to be signalized. We have two hands raised. I think I'll go to one of those here. So I will go to Sandra.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much. So I actually have a series of thoughts. So if you want me to take them one at a time, I'm happy to. So just cut me off when you'd like. They're also not necessarily in a good order. I just wrote them down as we were going. So I live right here on the corner of Lincoln and Spring Street and the train track. And I'm really excited just to say this is a very cool project. I'm very excited that it's happening. I love the idea of making Ellsworth a walkable place, a more walkable, more rideable place. There's so much opportunity, and it's just very, very cool. So thank you to everybody involved for trying to make this happen. So the first thing that I had thought of is very much the need also to talk a little bit to crosswalks. I love that there's always a thought about making High Street safer, but being on the side, actually north of Oak Street, I am a mom of 2 very small children, and even if I were on my own, Oak Street is extremely dangerous to cross. I would love to be able on Saturday mornings to walk to the farmer's market or the library with my kids. That is just not something we do. I know that there's a crosswalk right at Main Street there, but I know how, even if the sign tells me to walk, it's not always, it's just not safe. And I just want to throw out there, thank you for thinking of crosswalks. Would love to throw in a shout out for any crosswalks we can get at crossing Oak Street, at Birch Park, or even Church Street. Any one of the 3 would be incredible. And there's so many families and kids up here that I know we want to cross and go, you know, to the Grand and things like that. So that's that one. Do you want me to keep going? So that was my first thought.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So the next one, actually, you talked about environmental impact. So I guess I don't know if it's a question or a thought, but really back in 2015, a number of neighbors in this area really got a better understanding after seeing an incredible amount of spraying going on the tracks and, you know, along Spring Street here, that it was actually quite upsetting. And we learned that there was herbicides used, some pretty intense ones. And since then, there has been a lot less spraying done, which has been great. Pretty sure it still happens I don't know how often, but we do notice it happens from time to time, and we understand that it in some cases needs to happen, but there's some pretty intense herbicides that are being used, and having kids right here, pets, families walking around, wildlife. I guess my feedback is in this particular study is that for a number of reasons, I would want to take one of the routes that limits to the degree we can the use of those chemicals. Of course, for public safety, absolutely. But we notice that when the vegetation goes away, not only do we lose a lot of beautiful, vegetation around here, but erosion happens. And there are some pretty significant erosion issues in areas where there is no grass or trees. And right out in front of my house, there's one happening. And just up the road here. And so I throw out there that I get that in some cases they have to use some of the chemicals that Maine DOT, but I would want to limit that to the best that we can.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So the other thing is actually on the routes that were talked about. So according to the map that you had shared, which was very helpful, I noticed and am now a little concerned as I may be able to safely say that we are the closest house along this route. And so if you've been around here, you probably know which one I'm in. We're extremely close to the tracks. And I guess I would say that I was surprised to hear that the staying along the north side of the track and extending is a possibility. However, the study plan map that shows the yellow in the study plan doesn't actually include the north side of the track. And I am a little worried. Yes, this is the slide. So, okay, so my house is that one where it dips close to the tracks. And I am very
Which one
nervous.
here?
That's the one. I'm right there on the front porch. Can you see me waving?
Yes.
That there is very little land to create a bike path there, to the point where it would be right up against our house and actually right at our 2 main entrances.
Yeah, in this location here.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Right. Yeah, and as I think as Ethan mentioned, we would look, there's some alternatives that we would look at briefly and make a decision as to, what the impact would be and if it would be worthwhile to, pursue past a certain point. And this is obviously one of those areas that would be very challenging to try and get through. Not even from a land standpoint, but from a building standpoint, as you just described. So I totally agree that this is something that we would evaluate. But in this area, Spring Street is obviously another option that we're looking at as well.
Absolutely. And what's very cool about having observed over the 11 years of being here, and since this path, the bike path was put in, there are a wonderful number of bikers, families, walkers who head right down Spring Street. And we do as well. So I take my kids out biking and it's awesome and it's very cool. And that's why I'm very excited about the project, extending the two.
Having seen Spring Street, they must be mountain bikes.
Well, yes, it is a little hairy down there. But it's there. We're doing it. We still do it.
No, that's great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So that is definitely a concern of mine.
Okay.
Is obviously is that, I would go so far as if we lost the land here to a bike path, I'm not sure that we would be able to sell the property if we ever wanted to move. Like it takes up a significant portion of our land.
No, I agree.
Or access to our house. Anyway, we drive by and see it.
I think at this point, I would like to cut you off just so that I can give other people an opportunity. And then if there's more time at the end, feel free to raise your hand again if we haven't covered everything yet. Okay, thank you very much. Let me just go to a couple of other comments here. Teresa is asking, has the Ellsworth school system been involved in this project? Several parents have called to voice concern with school connecting with downtown. Since we're just getting involved with this study, I would say no, but that's something that we, again, would want to hear from so that we can understand where those concerns might be. So that's something that we'll try and connect with as well.
Tony,
Janet, do you want to?
Yeah, just one thing on that. There used to be a walking school bus program that was sponsored through the Bicycle Coalition of Maine that happened in Ellsworth, where they would utilize the trail. So definitely aware that there's a lot of young kids. I guess the impetus behind the rail trail that starts at Birch Avenue is that it goes right by schools and has great access to schools. So definitely aware that they are some of the big users. And that was, part of this project is the fact that we have so many people that live in the urban core that are trying to get not only to amenities, but to school. And so I think that we can keep them abreast of what is going on with this project. And I think really overall what they're looking for is a safe connection. And so happy to have them involved in helping weigh what they foresee as that safe connection.
Agreed. Thank you. Lisa. Oh, where'd you go? There we go. Lisa, you want to go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't have anything, so I'm Lisa Sekulich, I'm the Public Works Director. I just wanted to answer or just kind of comment on some of the other comments you got real quick.
That's what I was hoping.
So the question about Beals Ave and closing it down, the potential for closing it down, I agree with you, Tony, 100%. That's kind of part of this study is to hopefully get some voice from the people on Bales Avenue. I believe at this point in time, the city staff is in favor of closing it off, but obviously there will be a separate public hearing and work revolving around the actual reconstruction of Beals Avenue. Should it happen, there'd be a separate public meeting where we would invite all the residents of Beals Avenue to be involved in that. So that's the Beals Avenue comment. And then to comment on the last speaker about spraying and stuff along the path. In the last few years, there was spraying previously. In the last few years, there's been less spraying, and we've actually gone to a Natural Lawn of America, which is a more eco-friendly and organic type pesticides on the path as well as at the parks. So it's not great, but it's better than it was before. So
All right.
that's all I think I had, unless anybody else has questions.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Let's see. Patrick Adams added that Jim Fisher several years ago, he had talked to Jim Fisher several years ago about this project, and he'd been a very good source of background that we might use. So additionally, we should be able to connect with him and some other partners. And HPC just hired a new director, so we can hopefully engage with them as well. Mark Blanchette, I see that you have your hand raised and you have a comment, so I'll let you speak. How's that? Go ahead, Mark.
Hi, good evening. Just want to add to the spray issue. I think what Lisa was talking about was what the city is responsible for as far as our parks. I believe the resident that's brought it up was talking about the railroad spraying, which they do every year, late May, early June. You can put up what they call no spray signs at the beginning and at the end of your property. We have them here at our house, and the railroad is very diligent on following them. A couple of our neighbors have put them up. When the train enters that no spray zone, they do turn off their chemicals. And as soon as they hit the spray sign again on the back side on the back end of the property, that's when they turn them back on. So that's something that the resident over at the corner of Lincoln and Spring Street might want to look into.
Okay,
The signs are probably $3-4 a piece.
great. I think Sandra is happy for that information. And also, you had a comment as well, Mark, that keep in mind that the intersection of Main Street and Beals Ave also includes a third street, which is true. Let me, right here, which is just off the page here, but Union Street that comes in here. So it is kind of a three-pronged intersection that would be a little more challenging for a crossing at that location. We have another question here. Ken, not a question, just input. Thank you. EV penetration will be increasing markedly in the coming years. It's likely that e-bikes will increase greatly as well. They are already a sizable share of bike rentals in the region. Please consider joint charging infrastructure, or at least nearby, to reduce charging infrastructure costs and increase use. And then number 2, COVID-19 has increased bike ped, like many changes, like work from home. This active transportation is likely to stay. Please plan accordingly. Thank you for the comment, Ken. Comments, Ken. I think that you're absolutely right that this current condition is probably going to change the way we live and work for quite some time, where a lot more people are probably going to continue to work from home and find other ways of recreation and traveling in general. We have another few comments here. Robin, yes to the crosswalks around Oak Church, Oak, Birch, etc. Thank you. Just adding to Sandra's comment, the use of these herbicides to control weeds are documented to cause cancer in dogs who spend a lot of their time with their nose and forepaws on the ground. Thank you for the comment. And I think that takes care of all the comments that we have. And I don't see any more hands raised. So at this point, I guess I would ask, are there any other questions or comments that people might have before I move on? And oh, I do see Sandra has her hand raised. Okay. Go ahead, Sandra.
Hi, yes, it's me again. Hi. The only last thought that I wanted to throw out there, and this is so very specific, but it was something that we experienced when we took our small kids to try to go from our house to the Sunrise Trail. And I love that you pointed out that the Union and Main Street is two-pronged, and it was extremely dangerous for us to try to get over to Beals Ave, even to the point where it was hard for my small kids to get their bikes onto the sidewalk, because there wasn't like a low spot for us to kind of have them scoot onto. So I just wanted to throw out there, and I know you will probably look at this, but the sidewalks are great so long as they can be easily accessed, you know, with low spots to get on them, which I think you have to anyway. So this was an observation there. And then the intersection at Beals and Main, I can tell that there's quite a few options there, but to the extent that we can keep people from having to go down that hill at all, again, with handling, you know, kids and my own bike, being forced down the hill to get onto the sidewalk was a very scary situation. And we actually opted to get on the tracks, walk along the tracks to get onto the trail. So I guess I only throw out to the point where we can keep people from going down the hill towards Main Street traffic would also be preferred.
Okay, that's a great comment. Thank you. All right, so let's just talk about next steps here. We are going to collect all of the feedback that we get tonight. And as I mentioned, this meeting is recorded. So we have everything, including all the comments that have been discussed and answers that have been discussed. And we will make copies of the comments that were provided in the question and answers as well. And prepare a summary of the comments and review everything with the Technical Advisory Committee as we move forward. So the remaining project schedule is we will be evaluating all the information to develop our conceptual path locations. And as I had mentioned, we'll have another advisory committee meeting, hopefully at the end of September. Develop some recommendations in the draft report, September, October timeframe. Come back to the public with a second meeting to present those recommendations in October. And then we will finalize the report in November, and possibly, depending on time frame, could run into December, but we will see. We do have two other comments here. I just want to, Heart of Ellsworth is very excited about this project. Way to go, City of Ellsworth. So thank you for the comments. And Jim Geary, Maine Community Foundation would welcome the trail on along our eastern border to avoid Beals Ave and the up-down hill issue that Sandra raised. That is very good to know as well. Thank you, Jim. So I'd say with that, if we do not have any other comments, Christine Keeney, thank you, Jim, for your support. I would say that we are complete for tonight's meeting. I would really like to thank everybody for their participation. And if there's any other things that you think of, you can continue to send comments or information to Kerry Taylor, and we will get them forwarded along to us. And with that, I would just open it up if there's anything that anybody else wants to say, Jana, or anybody else that's online. Okay.
Hey, Tony, this is Nate.
Hey, Nate.
Nate Howard.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, just, one thing on your last schedule, we talked about the final public meeting and, the final report. Nobody asked it, but people usually do, like, okay, what comes next? Really, people want to see, they like projects more than studies. So the question is, what comes next? And that's really implementation. By the end of the year, we should have a conceptual layout. Where the trail's going to go here, north side, south side, Beale Street or not. Have kind of a decision on that. And, we'll also have cost, right? How much is it going to cost? Is it hundreds of thousands? Is it more than that? So after the end of the year, that's when the conversations happen about, all right, we know what it's going to cost. We know where we want it to go. And how do we implement this project? So that's sort of the next phase of this would be implementation after the study is complete.
No, that's a great point. And that, as I mentioned, will take some time, but I think if we can hopefully try and identify some potential interim measures that could improve some conditions that were raised tonight, and not necessarily cost a ton of money, then we could, there are some things that could be done hopefully in an interim to help things along, but it wouldn't by any means have a trail system that would connect the two together within a year, that's for sure. But I think that the hope is that we will come up with a plan that can be implemented moving forward, and look for various funding opportunities along the way. So thank you for pointing that out, Nate. Okay, so if there's nothing else, then I will say thank you all again for joining us this evening, and look forward to continuing to come to a successful end of this project as we move forward with good input from the community. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the evening.